Welcome to the Dynasty Dummies podcast. I am Zach Reed. I am joined by JMic at JMic Check. We are post week one, kind of in the middle of the beginning of week two. So if you're not joining us live, don't feel bad. We understand you're watching the Vikings, watching the Eagles, that beautiful DeAndre Swift game that we all know is going to happen because I forgot to set my lineup in Scott Fishbowl and he's on my bench. So he's just going to go off. And Gus Edwards will be a nothing this week because I think he's actually in my lineup. But that's not what we're here to discuss. We're not here to discuss my Scott Fishbowl or my shortcomings as a lineup setter. We are back with a little bit of a different perspective on fantasy football, dynasty fantasy football, because we know that, and especially me, I know that you can get recaps better somewhere else. You may not be able to get them better than what JMic can do in 15 minutes. I've seen it happen, but you're going to be able to find someone better at breaking things down, X's and O's, and what happened, and recapping a week than I could ever do. But what JMic and I specialize in is finding the places where the other people aren't, finding those edges, because the edges are never at the middle. The edges are always on the outside, and the edges may be small, but a lot of little things make a big thing. And I want to start off. I've been reading a lot lately, and I've been reading, and I just finished up a book by Matt Haig called How to Stop Time. And there was a fun quote in there that I think jumps us off pretty well to what we're going to talk about with some of the things that we've seen in week one, seen in the preseason, and what we expect going forward. But the quote is, the key to happiness is finding the lie that suits you best. I'm not sure you want the lie. I think you want to parse what is the lie and figure out clinically how to move forward with what the truth is more often than not. But JMic, how are you this evening? I hope we can find something fun to find an edge.
Now you've got me questioning what I really want from this evening. Have I been telling myself a lie? Am I navigating, as they say in Elf? Am I sitting on a throne of lies currently in my workspace at home? But grateful to be with you. Grateful to be able to have football and talk strategy, talk ball. Because here at the Dynasty Dummies, if there's one thing that we know ball. So no, that's just some fun to have. So Zach, we do have action. We've had action. Week one took place. Week two is upon us. And now, Zach, I think it's as important as ever for us to continue to, as we mentioned many times prior to the year, set the course for where we want to go. And I think the discussion and the quote, the book, the reading that you've done that brings us to this conversation point, I think is a salient one indeed. We had so much that took place in the non-point scoring season. We have now entered the time where games are happening. Long, beautiful touchdowns have been made. Injuries have already set rosters asunder. There is a lot that's taken place. And so now, what does it look like for us to parse through what we saw, what we think we saw, and what we wish we saw, and we're trying to tell ourselves that we did see? So let's unpack this a little bit, Zach. When you think through week one, when you think through this quote, when you think through all of the things that have taken place between our rookies now landing on fields, between the injuries that J.K. Dobbins, Aaron Rodgers, all of these things, where does your mind go regarding how we launch forward into the rest of this season?
So it's interesting because initially I thought I was going to start off in LA because that's been the topic of conversation has been Puka Nakua and seeing a 43% target share. I want to get there. I don't want to start there because I think there's a lot of meat there. But the thing that you said that just jumped started a kernel in my brain is the Aaron Rodgers injury. And I'm really worried about Garrett Wilson for this year. But that also gives you a potential at some point during this season to acquire Garrett Wilson for maybe less than what it would have cost prior to the Aaron Rodgers injury. It's one of those things I've been seeing a lot of great tweets, X's, tweets. I've been seeing a lot of great tweets about the Zach Wilson, the reemergence of Zach Wilson. Last year, Garrett Wilson saw as many targets per game in games where Zach Wilson played as he had catches per game in games that Zach Wilson did not play. So to think that Garrett Wilson is going to escape unscathed, that Garrett Wilson is going to be the shining light that we expected him to be, that he's going to take the huge sophomore leap, the meteoric rise that we expected. Because as soon as Aaron Rodgers ended up in New York with the Jets, you're taking one of the best, most promising young wide receivers and putting him with a Hall of Fame quarterback who is probably the most efficient quarterback outside of maybe Drew Brees that I have ever seen, and tying them together. And then all of a sudden, 4 plays in, you rip that apart. And so it's a widespread panic, I think, and this is me working in micro markets, and these are things that I can predict the future. It's not so. There was an interesting question the other day. And sorry, I don't mean to jump, but somebody asked what game theory meant to me because we talk about game theory quite a bit on this podcast, and I said, well, the true definition of game theory really is being able to analytically predict the best possible approach to a situation if you play that out to the nth degree. But that's not really what we do. Really, what we want to do is approach things from a behavioral economics perspective. So that Daniel Kahneman that we talked about last year an awful lot, and because behavior in fantasy football, behavior of crowds, behavior of people is not rational, but it's predictable. So it's easy to see the community cool on Garrett Wilson a little if he doesn't produce like we thought. It's easy to see. I mean, you're already hearing people question T. Higgins because Jamar Chase was drafted. T. Higgins put up a 0 last week. He was a nothing. And is that going to be enough to create buy windows on some of these fantastic players? I mean, Dak Prescott had a terrible game last week. He's already out of favor. He's injury prone. That offense is going to run the ball. Like, there are buy windows or at least depressions in the collective consciousness and the collective valuation that are pretty easy to be able to see just based on situation and the way we see value and the way we run value out so fast now. Drake London is another one. And I'm not a huge Drake London fan, but you're going to be able to get in on Drake London, who is a very good wide receiver. Like, he's borderline top 24, I think. But the situation is terrible. Desmond Ritter's not very good. Arthur Smith wants to run the ball. They drafted Bijan Robinson. They're going to win games running the ball. So, like, it's a matter of looking at things to me clinically, and it's not the lie that suits you best. See through that, because it's easy to have that anchor bias. It's easy to say, oh, well, this is what happened, so this is what is. Don't look at what is. Look at what that means, and look at what everybody else is thinking about what is, and try to gain your advantage on the other side of that.
Leveraging that hypothesis for your good. If this, then that. And if there is one thing that we know, Zach, without a shadow of a doubt about this game that we play, we know that people and dynasty managers and people who play in a lot of leagues and really enjoy and sweat this and live this on a week-to-week basis, we know these people, we are not long-suffering. That is not something that we are in this game. We are not long-suffering. To your point, precisely, we are not rational, but we are predictable. And if we know that we are not long-suffering, we understand that if there's any hint, if there's any smell of a Drake London donut coming back, a Garrett Wilson 5 for 30 game, if there is another T. Higgins struggle busing, if there's another Cincinnati collapse, any of those things continue, we very much know that if these are long-term bets that we're placing on players that we know are really talented, that may not be leveraging or part of situations that are fantastic right now, what is the path to being able to acquire and, in some instances, as we'll probably get to, unload the mirages that we do not consistently buy into? And I think now this kind of plays perfectly into what we often talk about, Zach, with being able to make decisions early, being first to market. And that's probably another conversation that's probably a week or two away. But again, living and playing this game with the end in mind, seeing through with our hypothesis, if this, then that. I think that keeping these things in mind now can help yield results going forward.
Absolutely. And I think being disciplined about it is a key to this. And it's, you say we're not long suffering. I would go even further to the dynasty landscape has become more and more and more about instant gratification.
Microwave,
It's
baby.
yeah, it's shifted so far toward not redraft isn't quite the right vocabulary, but similar, where you used to be, oh, it's a third year breakout for wide receivers. We used to be hanging on to running backs for 5-6 years. We had a little bit of a comfort zone, and then all of a sudden things changed. You had Todd Gurley come in, burn bright, and then be gone. You had Le'Veon Bell be one of the most prolific scoring running backs in the history of fantasy football, hold out, never get back, be replaced by James Conner, and be admirably replaced by James Conner. You have the influx of dynasty has grown. So you have all of these people come in from redraft, because there's no question that redraft fantasy football is the giant. That's where the most people are. Dynasty is a niche, whether we want to admit that or not, whether we want to believe that or not. I think it's a great niche. I think it's a fantastic game. I love the long-term strategy. I love the non-point scoring season strategy. I love the ability to get ahead of everybody else in the off season, but you have this big influx from the big brother, the redraft community. especially with the pandemic, there is a ton of, oh, well, what's this? Oh, it's Dynasty. Well, it's fantasy football. I know how to play fantasy football. And so there are people relearning all of the things that, Peter Howard or Sean Siegel or Denny Carter or JJ Zachariason taught us back in 2013 or 2014 or 2015 or 2016. You're having people relearn those lessons from 2020 to now. And so the game completely reset, or at least partially reset, because you had this big influx of new old ideas. And so to to think about things now as a long-term player, to be able to keep the end in mind, as you said, and be disciplined about that, I think is really to your advantage. And this is one of my prouder moments, but Peter Howard and I do the grind on DLF on their YouTube live stream on Wednesday nights. And for the longest time, I've talked about my strategy of drafting running backs, playing them for 2 years, maybe 3 on the very outset, and even good running backs. Even, I mean, we're talking McCaffrey, we're talking Jonathan Taylor, we're talking Gurley when he was here, we're talking Zeke. This is how I play. You saw me do this with Nick Chubb, trade him away. I didn't get as much as I should have for Nick Chubb, but that's an entirely different. But what I try to do is play those running backs for 2 years, 3 at the very max, and then trade them for a pick and a young, proven wide receiver, and what I consider proven. And I do that, and sometimes I lose bad. I traded Christian McCaffrey, and Christian McCaffrey is still the dynasty, running back 3. He's still the redraft running back 1. He's still a tremendous scorer. Saquon Barkley, the same thing. But you also, if you do that, you end up building your team the way I want to build my team, around players like Justin Jefferson, around AJ Brown, this year around Jordan Addison. Like, there are Jackson Smith and Jigba. Like, that is the core that I want. Jalen Waddle, Devontae Smith. I want those young wide receivers because I can have them on my team long enough to restock that running back room and then have a 3-year window where my team is uber competitive before I started again with trading the running backs for young, proven wide receivers. And Peter does the yeah, where he doesn't really listen. And that's fine, because he's got so many brilliant thoughts going through his head. But one day I said, I do this because it works more often than not, and I have to be disciplined and do it every time, because if I don't, and I know it works more often than not, then all of a sudden I tip the odds away from me. Because if I start trying to pick and choose and guess which running backs are not going to fade away into oblivion like Gurley did and like Ezekiel Elliott just did, if I try to grasp and try to figure out and pick at straws, I am going to lose, because I'm not good enough to do that. I can't predict the future, but what I can predict is most running backs after their 3rd season have maybe 1 or 2 seasons. But if I can get that pick and I can get that young, proven wide receiver, it doesn't matter, because I'm restocking my cupboard right there. So I'm not worried about that because I'm disciplined. And I think if you can do that, again, keeping the end in mind with every decision you're making, you're going to be better off, especially in a game now where people are, it's like the scene in Hook. When something happens, everybody runs over to Rufio. And then all of a sudden, Puka Nacua has, 7 catches for 119 yards, and everybody runs back over to Peter Pan. And then everybody run. You have this real quick flux and this short, goldfish memory of dynasty players right now. If you can be the one who has that long-term goal in mind, has the discipline enough to know what is most likely to happen and continue to make plays to do that, to affect that on your roster, man, I think you're going to be so much further ahead of the game.
What is old is new again, right? Let me say, there's nothing new under the sun. We're recycling at this point. I think so much about a comedian, the Hudson brothers. They're comedians. One's on Wild 'N Out, and one, Philip. He's one. He makes videos, and on his videos, he always labels them, "Got to see it through, my boy. I got to see it through." And I think so much of this process that you're referring to. Hey, you got to see it through, and taking the time to understand that the game that we're playing is a long-term game. Yes, we want our points, right? We want to hit up JG Wentworth to be able to have our points now. I like winning titles and I need points now. Come trade me players. 877 studs now. Like we love that. We get it. I get it. The piece of this though, and like you said, and major shout out to Jason Tran and Derek from Gut Feelings Pod, right? With the gut feels. Yes, there are times where it feels really good to hit on the gut feels, but also understanding that the processes and being able to see these things through and working within a process is going to help us parse through a lot of the noise that we're going to hear, especially when it's vastly different. When it's vastly different than everything else that we've talked through. Because with even guys like, and again, even if we talk about debuts and first impressions, I feel like we're now at the part of the program where it's okay to talk through what took place, right? We did have Puka Nacua, who people were really excited about. Some, I should say, were really excited about from the Senior Bowl. I guess, let me take a step back for a second, Zach. One of the things I had mentioned on the program and several months ago when we went through rookie drafts, this was the year I was going to try something different. When we got to the second and third rounds of rookie drafts, I did not want to be in on this class when it came to guys who were taken in day 3. I wanted to continue to try to load up on Tajay Spears, the Tank Bigsby's, even later on when we're looking at the Evan Holes. And even though I wasn't loving it, I wanted to take my medicine on the likes of the Dwayne McBrides in the event that something took place in Minnesota. I wanted to be in on the running backs. And so a lot of these guys, and if we remember, as fun as it is, and people will say, well, it doesn't matter because now they're on the NFL field. Puka was a 5th round pick, and not just any 5th round pick. He was picked with compensatory picks at the end of the 5th round.
177 overall.
Right. And so, and this is not to diminish, and it's not to poo-poo Puka. This is to just simply say, from a process standpoint, it's one of those things where, hey, I'm okay missing on Puka Nacua because I have this thought that I really want to be in on what I feel like now is, and almost, I don't want to use this as confirmation bias with week 1, the rise of the changeup, right? And you talk a lot about, excuse me, let me rephrase. You don't talk a lot about your time as a professional baseball player, but I will, daggone it. And so when we think back to the Braves dynasty, right, and with these guys, Greg Maddux, who location. The changeup is the king. And I think about the rise of the changeup specifically with these running backs. I'm really excited to see these guys get opportunity early because it starts to at least affirm part of my suspicion in that they're not necessarily even a changing of the guard, but the landscape, I think, is about to start looking a little bit different than what people anticipated coming into this year. We saw Brees Hall absolutely go nuts, even though he didn't start. We saw him break off big plays in week 1. Obviously, Bijan was really good. We know Jahmyr Gibbs had flashes, but even the likes of different backfields, if we're looking at all of a sudden, Josh Kelly gets work. All of a sudden, we see, and again, I know that the Eckler injury was there and things of that nature, but we're starting to see all these backfields. Kenneth Gainwell gets all the work in Philadelphia in an offseason where they bring in Rashad Penny and DeAndre Swift. So, like, all of a sudden, these messy backfields are now going to give way to opportunities. Tajay Spears getting more targets, or excuse me, having more routes run, I think, than Derrick Henry did. Like, stuff can get nutty. And so all of a sudden, we have the opportunity for these value spikes. But I'm rambling at this point, Zach, but I want to get back to obviously anything else that is popping for you. But when we think through the mirage of what week 1 was, what am I telling myself about what we've seen? Where am I landing and how am I applying this with understanding that we're looking not just at week 1, but we're looking through week 1? What else pops or comes to mind as we round out this discussion?
So for me, we got to talk about Puka. Puka's the warthog in the room, as it were. Great game. 10 receptions, 15 targets. That's a 40. There's like a 43, maybe a 46% target share. Peter Howard is in the chat. We get the live show going. So he says Puka sucks, but he may have the exact target share. I know he's a maven with the spreadsheets, but all of that is great, and you can't take that away from Puka Nacua. Like, that was a tremendous game, but you mentioned 5th round compensatory pick, 177th overall. You mentioned, or maybe you didn't mention, but played all 4 years, played at both Washington and BYU.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't ever dominate anywhere he went.
Mm-hmm.
Ended up on the field because Cooper Kupp is injured.
Well,
Yeah.
I said, well, just keep preaching, keep going.
Yeah. And so, like, you can't, then this is, again, it's not to denigrate Puka Nacua. It's not to say that he didn't have a great game. It's not to say that, but we tend to think linearly with careers.
Yes.
So in our mind, there is a progression from what Puka Nacua just did, 10 catches, 119 yards, and that game that he just had where he dominated Seattle, to him continuing to get better and progress from there. And that's not necessarily the way careers work. This may be the best game that Puka Nacua ever plays. I'm not saying it is, but it very well may be. But in our mind, the way the human mind processes, we think linearly. Oh, Peter says 39.5% target share, 50% targets per route run, which he loves. It's a great stat. I'm waiting for him to just blow me up in the chat. But to me, Puka Nacua is another one in this long line of, and I mentioned Kevin Ogletree when we were talking Puka Nacua on the grind, but Kevin Ogletree, I don't know if you remember him with the Cowboys. Yeah, and he had like 144 yards and 3 touchdowns in week 1, and everybody was rushing out to get Kevin Ogletree, picking him up off the waiver wire, trading for him, and it was bad process. And to me, I am willing to make the bet and trade Puka Nacua now for, if you can get a 2nd round pick. I would prefer to pair a 2nd with Puka and see if I can move into the 1st round.
Yes.
If I can do that, I'm willing to be wrong on Puka Nacua. I'm cheering to be wrong on Puka Nacua. I hope that next year Derek Brown comes up to me at the expo and says, I told you Puka Nacua was the second coming of Cooper Kupp. I told you so. I hope that happens. But I'm still going to get out of him for that price, for that second, or for Puka and a second for a first, because 85% of the time, that's the right bet on the 5th round pick, the guy who never popped the profile. So, like, this is a small sample size, and I understand it's the NFL sample size, but I'm going to be disciplined. I'm going to make the bet that I make on those players. And it wasn't like, it's not the Tyreek Hill. It's not the Stephon Diggs. There weren't anything off field. It's not even the Keyshawn Boutte. There was nothing off field that plummeted his draft stock. It's simply that he was underwhelming. And so one fantastic game in the NFL doesn't change who he was. He did really well given the situation, but nobody's talking about Tutu Atwell, who did the same thing, on fewer catches, more air yards. Like,
but this is the thing, Zach. This is what I don't know if necessarily people are going to say this, but this is the thing that I think folks need to consider. If you understand that this is your process, or you go about a process of understanding where you're drawing the line for I'm in, when you're drawing the line of I'm out, where and when does your process then begin the work of refinement, tweaking? Let's say that Puka continues his ascent or continues producing and earning whatever 39.5% target share, whatever the case is. And maybe it's not just about what Puka does, but again, I want to take this even big picture. Where and when do you start saying, maybe I need to tweak my process? Is it after the Puka blow up season? Is it after we see Puka Nacua types over the next few seasons? Where do you then go about drawing the line that says my process needs reconfiguring?
Yeah, and so that happens sometimes. I mean, I am. You hear the term Bayesian thrown around all the time, but it's when you have new information, but actual information, that you will change your mind about how you go about doing your day-to-day business.
Mm-hmm.
And so if Puka Nacua individually is great, but he's the outlier, he's one of those, the 15% that hits out of it, that's fine. He may be one of those players that I will go try to acquire, the young, proven wide receiver who now I'm trying to acquire with that running back and get a first back. Like, I don't mind paying back up for Puka Nacua if he becomes something great.
Right.
That's fine. But to change the process, you've got to take that 15% or 12% and get that up into a reasonable number. It's got to be 25 or 30, to get back up into, okay, these guys are hitting like second round picks now.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's buy into that with second round picks, because I'd rather have the guy who's doing it than a second round pick that has a chance to do it. But I want to have the odds be in my favor. And I think that's the thing that it's so hard to be clinical. It's so hard to be rational, because we get emotional. We get narrative driven. We fall in love with these players. And like, I don't mean to pick on Derek, but like, Derek Brown was one of the most vocal Puka Nacua advocates that I've heard. And he started at the Senior Bowl.
Yeah.
He fell in love with him at the Senior Bowl. And again, if Puka Nacua is great, that's awesome, because Derek saw him at the
nailed it.
senior, and he got it. Yeah,
Yep.
and you have that connection. I mean, like, I know you and I feel that way about Justin Jefferson.
We got one of those.
I know we do, and it's great. But also, you have to understand that Justin Jefferson was taken in the first round.
Right.
So there's a complete difference. Like, yes, we were on him before people were on him. We got the maybe I'll change this. Maybe I'll change this show to I just don't see it with Jefferson boys. But we were on him before the consensus got there, but then the consensus got there. Like with what Derek is doing is making a bet on a huge outlier.
Mm-hmm.
And if that hits, that is awesome. But the way I play, I'm not going to bet on the lower percentage, the really low percentage chance of Puka Nacua being Cooper Kupp. Like it's hard for me to see, and especially so this week, and this is like I would be moving to trade Puka Nacua right now because the hype has been big. He had a great week. He had, again, 10 catches, 119 yards. It's a monster fantasy week.
Yeah.
They're going to play San Francisco next week.
Mm.
San Francisco is pretty darn good defensively. Yeah. They don't allow very much to happen on their watch, and it's going to be really hard for Puka to not only replicate what he did, but it's going to be hard for him to get any sort of traction against that 49ers defense. They stuffed it to Pittsburgh last week. I mean, Pittsburgh scored 7 points, and that was being generous.
Right.
And I'm going to err on the side of I've seen this happen. I've seen this happen a whole bunch of times, and I'll make that bet and hope that I'm wrong because I'm not going to cheer against Puka Nacua, but I'm making that bet because this is what I expect to happen. This is what has the best chance of happening. And again, it's not a Puka is bad. It's players that come out and look like Puka throughout the entire process don't succeed very often.
Yeah.
And so that's the bet I'm making it.
And that becomes, by the way, I'm curious how many people can actually spell the word Bayesian without looking it up first. That can be the challenge this week for you all. So many good things, so many nuggets to pull from what you talked through, Zach. One thing that I really want people to understand is that there are consequences to everything that you do, right? These are good and these can be bad, right? There are consequences in all things that we do. And so understanding when you go about your process, even early in the dynasty season, understanding that there are consequences. So what Zach just walked through, Zach is explaining to you exactly how he'd walk through this. Hey, the percentage chance that Puka becomes this out of this world top 12, top 18, top 24 type guy that we're seeing on a year-to-year basis, or that is someone that's highly valued in dynasty, is pretty slim. And in doing so, he's not willing to pay early draft capital in the draft season, and even after being a 5th round pick in the NFL draft, not willing to try to pay anything to get Puka now. Even so, if he had Puka now, being able to move off of him for, hey, if you're going to give me a first and it takes me giving up Puka and a second, I'm happy to do so. So this means that, hey, later on down the line in a year, if Puka crushes it, and then we see Puka continue to crush it, Zach will then be excited to say, hey, I was wrong. I'm willing to pony up what it takes to be able to have Puka on my team now because he's bucked the trend. He's part of the 15%, not the 85 that have fallen short. And in doing so, understanding that he's willing to pay more later as the tax that says he is who I thought that he was not. Okay.
Yeah.
So understanding, again, that's the consequence. If you're not willing to pay it now and he is that guy, you do have to pay later. But also understanding the flip side of this. If he's not that guy and people are willing to pay to say that he is, then all of a sudden you're reaping so many of the rewards and benefits, understanding that this is a mirage. Again, the key to happiness is finding the lie that suits you best. And I feel like that takes us to such a sweet place.
Yeah, and again, like I don't think if you play it the way in my mind that I would play it, I don't think that you ever lose, because you get the picks and then you make the play to go get Puka later if he's great, and you continue to have value and you continue to have production. But if you do it the other way and you're on the side that trades the picks to go get Puka, you can win because you could have great Puka. But there's also that chance that you lose, because if he's not what you think he is, and his value goes from being, add a second and get a first to, oh, well, he was a 4th round dynasty rookie pick or a 3rd round dynasty rookie pick. I'll give you a 3rd 2 years out, or I'll give you a 4th, or maybe not even that. Maybe it's just, okay, well, he flamed out. There is a chance you lose. And I know we don't play the game not to lose, but if you have a chance where your decision is you win or you win, or you make another decision and the chances you win or you lose, the best decision is to take the 2 wins. Yeah. And so that's really just kind of how it plays out to me. I'm not making a bet on Puka. It's not a bet on Puka or against Puka. It's a bet on past history.
Yeah.
What I know these players traditionally do most often. Yep. So, you take the player right out of it. Take the personal right out of it. And that's how I arrive at a lot of the decisions I make in fantasy football. Maybe that's not fun. Maybe it's not fun to take the personal out of it. It's not fun to take the attachment out of it. And like, I get attached to guys. Like I'll make a bet. I go with Justin Jefferson, or I ended up with a lot of Swift this year because everybody was off him, and I like Philadelphia. Didn't pay off very well last week. It looks better this week. But and Addison is another one this year that we kind of made that move. But like most of the time, I want to be clinical. Most of the time, I want to know what the chance is of me succeeding. And then I want to be the house. Yep. I want to be the house. I want to have the odds in my favor. And that's part of the reason why I lean so heavily on so many brilliant analysts and so many people who are really familiar with the numbers and the percentages of what happens. The reason why I lean on people like Peter Howard, the reason why I lean on people like Jacob Rickroad, the reason I lean on so many smart people is because they know, they have this history, they have the data that says this is what's most likely to happen. And all I have to do is listen to that and make my bets accordingly, and I'm going to be successful, or more successful more often than not.
And I'm glad you said it, because I was going to follow up thereafter just to be able to clarify. This is not about Puka.
Yeah.
This is us seeing Puka in week 1, and this is us seeing through Puka into the actual archetype, into all of the work that's been done to this point, and seeing through what, as you just explained, what history has shown us. And again, it would be really cool to be able to look up and say, wow, Puka's a
Yeah.
top 12 bona fide dynasty wide receiver. It's cool to see. And it's always fun to see people victory lapping in week one, because hey, it's fun, and putting our heart and time and efforts into these things is a good time. And so I love to see it, and this is a lot of fun to be able to navigate. So Zac, really cool discussion that we were able to unearth. So thank you again for the pleasure of being able to run alongside you in this. And I'm looking forward to all that this season is going to bring. And again, very soon, it's going to be a lot of fun to be able to talk about, hey, what you doing? You moving? What you doing? You buying in? You staying? What you doing? So thank you, brother. I appreciate you. And I'm excited about what the season is holding for us.
Yeah, me too. This was great. It's always fun to go into these with you, JMic, because we don't necessarily have a plan, but I always know, and I say this about you all the time, and it holds true. You always ask the questions that I didn't know I needed the answer to until you ask it. And those are the people that, if you're listening to this, those are the people that you need to surround yourself with. You don't need the answer people, because the answer people will give you this solution, but they're going to miss everything else around. And what JMic, I think what you do better than anybody else in this industry is parse those questions out. You don't necessarily bring answers all the time, but you have the questions that make people look around for the answers. It's not a straight path, because the straight path is not actually usually the way to get where you want to be, especially in this game where so many people are crowding onto that straight path. You end up with a traffic jam. You want the questions that get you around to the edges, that get you to the place that you need to be, but a different way.
And the beauty is we get to continue this forward. Incredibly kind words from you. I appreciate that. Thank you, my brother, very, very much. Thank you for that. And that's what I hope. Continue to ask good questions. Continue to get smart people like yourself talking, and getting us thinking bigger than what we see, and getting us thinking more strategy, more what's really happening, more how can we leverage these things for our benefit, and JG Wentworth some of these titles here. 877 studs now. Let's go.
Oh, I love it. That wraps for me. I appreciate everybody who joined us in the chat. Peter, appreciate your stats in the chat on call. And if you're listening to us in podcast form, we really appreciate you being here. It's a different type of show, and I hope you enjoy it, because we certainly do. It, to me, any night that I have a conversation with JMic and we can get in the weeds a little bit about Dynasty and be a little bit outside of what everybody else is doing, that is fun. We will hopefully hit you again next week. And again, we appreciate you riding with us. JMic is at JMic Check. I am at Tacit Assassin 13. This has been the Dynasty Dummies. Thanks for listening. And now, somewhere is the button up at the top of the stream.
I believe in you, Zac.